All right, guys, we're here coming to you on Saturday with another very special episode. This wasn't technically on the scheduled docket, but this is a show that is important, so important to both of us. As you guys saw, Chris and I covered it last year on the podcast because this was like one of the last things to drop before the pandemic set in. And now I'm back with Eli, who I think this is like your fourth time now on the podcast to talk about the return of one of Netflix's most darling, critically acclaimed show of the last couple of years, Ozark, Season 4, Part 1. I would like to say more of Netflix experimentation could be going on here. Eli, you excited?
Oh, I'm so excited. I absolutely love this show.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. All that and more. Stay tuned. All right, Eli, we're here to talk everything Ozark related. The first part of the fourth season just dropped yesterday, technically on Netflix. We both finished it up, 7 episodes as part of a 2-parter. We see this happen with a lot of like couple final seasons of TV shows where they'll take their final season and split it into 2 parts. The Sopranos famously started this years ago. Breaking Bad has done it. Mad Men has done it. Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, BoJack Horseman did it. So Netflix has kind of hopped on that bandwagon recently. And Ozark is a little bit of an interesting beast. It came out, I feel like, right at the time when Netflix was starting to catch wind as far as like the second wave of Netflix that really started in 2017. I remember it came out like a couple months after Glow, which was another show that I was really into until Netflix unjustly canceled that. And the biggest thing that I remember hearing about this show when it first came out is people were saying, oh, this is nothing more than a Breaking Bad ripoff. So I wanted to start there. Eli, do you think there's any validity to that argument?
I think that anyone who might just see the resemblance where it's about just a family that has to do something illegal for the sake of their lives or, you know, something like that. And they kind of see that premise and just, oh, it's Breaking Bad. But, you know, it's not like it's the only show that's ever done that. It's, you know, it's a crime thriller drama. So I think the comparison is fair, but it's definitely not the same show. And there's a lot of differences here between the two. And they're very much their own separate thing, I believe.
Yeah, I definitely think that I feel like the closest comparisons probably really only come down to that first season and specifically that first episode. And it really honestly doesn't have anything to do with the drugs or the crime aspect of it for me, and more so has to do with what's it called? King Fidel, thank you for joining us. And spoilers, TBD is what I will say. We'll start off relatively spoiler-free. When we do go spoilers, we'll let you know. But I feel like the comparisons really only came in that first episode, that first season. And again, nothing to do with the drugs or the crime. It mostly had to do with I'd say the emasculation aspect. You know, we spent a lot of that first episode with Marty and kind of how he found out about his wife's affair, Wendy's affair at the time, and kind of seeing how, that has spawned into its own thing that's followed through to now. I definitely think that the comparisons, if anything, were very surface level, I feel like. But what I will say is kind of what comes down to the show's, crucial function as far as why everybody enjoys it is interesting, because I think that as we've spent more time with the show, as the years have gone on, we got season 2 very quickly. They followed that up 1 year later with the summer, and then it's been 2 years in between each two. Ozark season 3, we didn't get until January, January of 2020, or it might have been February. I don't remember specifically. And then we had to wait another 2 years because of the pandemic before we got part 1 of season 4. And what I will say is this, and for anybody watching, don't take this the wrong way, but what makes Ozark, I think, work as a show, as like a popular-ish show that people enjoy coming back to every time that it comes out, right? The more and more I think about it, I don't necessarily know if it has a lot to do with the craft per se, because Chris and I talked about this a lot 2 years ago when we did the 3rd season, and which famously is my least favorite season to date, which is that the elements of this that make it watchable are, I think, things that make a lot of other Netflix shows watchable, which are that it borrows a lot of soap opera elements, where to me, the thing that made that first season so compelling was it's like, wow, oh my God, why is it that these guys can't catch a break after a certain time? And all these things keep heaping up, and I thought that like the first season really captured that like tension of consistently like being out of your element, consistently having to think on your feet over, when the entire world is against you, or in this case, the cartel in this little podunk town in the Ozarks that they moved to. And I thought they established that really well. And then they did it again for season 2, and I'm like, okay. And then they really did it again for season 3. And I started to notice a little bit of the repetitive nature, which we know is kind of inherent to TV in general. And that, I will say, specifically, that wasn't my biggest problem with season 3. My still biggest problem is the Tom Pelphrey casting as Wendy's brother, and just how I think that just what an absolute disaster that character was in general. But so we're here with season 4. following up after, again, I will say, even though it was a lackluster season, probably one of the most shocking finales ever, I think Ozark has definitely cornered the market on shock value as far as
Oh,
keeping you engaged in, episode to episode. We ended with Helen's rather gruesome and abrupt death that happened literally right next to Marty and Wendy. And then we pick up immediately afterwards with them. They're in Mexico. They're at this lavish party that Navarro was throwing for them. And he gives them an out. And I have that as our first meeting. Again, we talk about this all the time, how so many shows don't know when to pull the plug and when to actually finish it. And this time around, we've actually got it where Navarro, famously introduced as, the big head honcho cartel member that was hinted at throughout the first 2 seasons. He was the guy that Del worked for. And then obviously once we met Helen in season 2, and then they brought him in season 3, we finally got to see him. And it was shocking when he offered them an out. He said, okay, I want the freedom of mobility to move in between the U.S. and Mexico. I know you guys pulled off this thing by crushing the Lagunas last season. It's the only reason why they survived and Helen didn't. And he's like, okay, I'm going to give you an out. You're going to basically make it so that I can travel across the border as a regular citizen, and you're going to make this deal happen with the FBI. Eli, first and foremost, so do you think that this deal is any more or less ridiculous than anything that the Birds have pulled off in the past? Because they have pulled off some pretty ridiculous shit on this show, just in the first 3 seasons alone.
I mean, when you think about the idea of a crazy, murderous drug lord, just wanting to basically say like, hey, I just want to, total immunity and to just live my life as I please, without the stress of my old life or whatever coming back to haunt me, without really doing any time or any justice or things like that. It seems pretty downright impossible.
It's a little bit far-fetched.
Oh, yeah.
Especially considering the fact that every time you get one of these scenarios, it's always like, oh, they were, these one law enforcement agents guys were so close to this one criminal. And then they find out, oh, their superiors or some other government agency already had a deal going with this guy. So the fact that we see it like from the cartel member, he's the one that wants to make the deal with the FBI in the first place. I guess that's a little something different that we haven't seen before, just as far as the turn and structure. But it's pretty ludicrous to begin with. And of course, as per usual, we get a couple new characters. We get, if I'm not mistaken, I even checked. So we get 2 new characters this season as well in order to kind of replace Helen and Ben, who we lost last season. The first character we get is Navarro's nephew, who's introduced. It's this guy, Javier, who is introduced. He's, he's the young buck. He wants to take over, his uncle's empire. He's hot, he's young, he's ruthless. He's also kind of a psychopath, as is established when he kills the sheriff at the end of the first episode. I don't know. You think he's trying to fill in Del's shoes? Because I think another kind of quintessential problem that not a lot of people have talked about with the show is the fact that they kind of shot themselves in the foot by having arguably one of the best antagonist introductions, just antagonist for a first season ever, that they take him out of the whole first season, and then by the time they bring him back to kill him off, I don't know, man. Like, I still think that them doing Del like that first season was so criminal because he was such an awesome antagonist. I don't know. Do you see shades of Del here with Javier?
Oh, I definitely do. But he's a lot more, I would say, reckless and just overall psychotic. At least Del was like smart and calculating, whereas Javi he wants what he wants and he'll do whatever he needs to just get it. No questions asked. It doesn't matter who does what about it. He feels he's in a spot where he's just so protected and he just can do whatever without feeling the repercussions of his actions.
Absolutely. And as we see from his actions this season, oh man, there are going to be some repercussions, to say the least. You want to talk about shocking, but we'll say satisfying finales. I will say that. We'll come back to that in a little bit. The other big character that's introduced here, it's interesting because this is a character that really, in hindsight, just as far as like kind of the plot semantics of like what we've come to expect from Ozark, and this is where I'm going to get more into the soap opera elements, because again, I feel like if Ozark, let's call it, we're like, say like I'm gonna call it like a good crime show, not like more of like they've definitely established themselves as more of like a pulpy crime show at this point. I think that's kind of why we love it,
Oh, yeah.
It's not doing what Breaking Bad did. It's not doing what Succession does, but we can still kind of appreciate what it is. It's this private investigator guy, Mel. I believe the actor's name is Adam Rothenberg. I wonder if that's a relation to a guy that we currently know. This private investigator who just starts poking his head around randomly about he's working for Helen's ex-husband and needs her signature on a divorce or something. We get like a little brief moment of him at the beginning of the 5th episode when it's revealed that he's a disgraced cop who is a little bit too into drugs. And I don't know. I feel like this character was both a problem and a godsend in the same instance, because every time he popped up, it was like just a brief reprieve from whatever crazy tense scenario the Birds found themselves in. But at the same time, every time he was also on screen, and like at the back of my head, I was keep thinking, I'm like, bro, someone's snooping around that could potentially bust this whole thing open. It's not FBI or cartel related. Cap this fool. Wendy had her own brother executed last season. Come on, they've killed way more important people for way less than this. Like, come on, like, I don't know, like plot hole or not.
I don't really think it's a plot hole. I think the whole mystery surrounding his character as he's slowly figuring everything out. Obviously, we saw the conversation where he overheard, Jonah and Charlotte talking about, the whole aftermath of the cartel and Navarro being arrested. I think they're definitely playing him up for something big and for the end game of obviously for part 2. But I wouldn't say he's much of a plot hole. I think, as we've seen with this show, I think the setup they're putting in place is definitely going to pay off in the end, and I think he'll definitely play a big role. Obviously, that phone call he had, with the FBI agent at the
Right.
very last episode, I think that's gonna come into play in a big way. I think we could maybe even see a possible team up for them or something, and who knows what's gonna happen.
Well, I guess just because of the sense that the birds are usually, for the most part, there are exceptions, but for the most part, the birds are usually so good with, keeping track of something and keeping track of what could be a potential threat. But then again, possibly not, because again, it's like this guy's snooping around. Just from a logistical standpoint, he's going to find out something, And I guess this is where the soap opera elements come in, because that's kind of part of the fun of watching a soap opera, like a more pulpy show, is that after a certain point, the show becomes pretty predictable. So the audience calls what's going to happen 15 steps ahead of what's actually going to happen in the show. But I guess that's kind of part of the fun with it, is seeing what pans out and what doesn't, because again, the shocking moments that you don't see coming, they do end up feeling like a lot more shocking, just as far as what Javier does by the end of the season, and how the Mel and Maya phone call by the end how that could balance out into next season. And especially since Maya pulled off the gangbusters, honestly, at the end of this episode, we're going to end it with, a tally bar, because again, there were a lot less people that died this season than I thought, but that usually happens whenever they have a penultimate versus an ultimate season, a final season. As we know, we saw with Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones penultimate season, there were only 2 main cast members died, and then the final season, it was Jesus, bodies hitting the ground every episode. So I have a feeling that we're going to see something similar here, to say the least, because I just don't think that with the move that she pulled, Maya's not long for this world. But hey, the one thing that I can say about Maya, though, just a quick tidbit, is because I feel like the biggest thing that Chris and I made fun of, the King, yes, absolutely. I give you that 100%. He was absolutely giving me Lalo from Better Call Saul vibes.
Ooh,
I could not
100%.
agree with that. That's actually a great take. I'm actually really glad that somebody else beat me to that, because I knew I was going to forget about that. But I guess the fact that, because Chris and I were kind of making fun of Maya last season, where it's okay, what is her only distinguishable characteristic other than the fact that she's pregnant? But the thing that I like this season is they gave her something to do. They actually gave her a little bit of a righteous cause. I actually liked the one scene that we had with, the shitbag FBI agent that was dating Petty in the last couple seasons. They had the one scene where he was extra. I thought that was pretty cool, kind of emphasizing actually giving her a little bit more of a character this time around, and to the point where she literally circumvented and fucked over her bosses by the end by having Navarro arrested after they'd already set the terms of the deal. I thought that was actually really, really well done. There's some good stuff character-wise. The one thing that I will say about Ozark is that even though the plot semantics gets absolutely ridiculous and bonkers at points, to the point of literal unbelievability, to the point of literal unbelievability, and where it feels like there's almost too much plot happening to keep up with. I do definitely think that the one thing that's been kind of mainstays from minute one is the fact that they do have such a strong, firm grasp of their characters, and they have been consistent with them. I think point number one, the fact that Jonah has officially earned the title of MVP of the show, because he is holding Wendy to task this entire season. And my favorite thing is that Wendy knows that he's right, and that she's so full of shit that the only thing that she could do to kind of combat him is to just pull a petty card by knocking out the power in his room, getting a red flag. Wendy has gone full on supervillain status for me at this point. It's kind of hilarious. I made jokes last season about the fact that she was literally twirling her figurative mustache, and we even saw a little bit of the accent come back when she was driving Ben around from place to place last season. But this season, she's just gone full on supervillain mode. She's in full on coercion mode. She's in full on blackmail mode, full on enforcer mode, literally to the point where she's okay with getting her son sent to jail. I don't know, Eli, if your mom was a crazy drug kingpin and you were helping to launder money, and then you went to work for competition, I don't know, would she pull some crazy shit like that?
Oh, I mean, well, my mom's no drug pin, but crazy maybe. When I saw the clip with the power, I'm just classic mom thing. But no, I would really like to talk about. I would like to talk about Wendy real quick. I think just Laura Lenny's performance,
one for the
phenomenal.
One for the ages. Oh my God. I will say, her being nominated and not winning last season, especially after having watched Euphoria now and being wow, that's a slap in the face that Zendaya won, even though I get it. I'm Laura Linney needs to win the Emmy this year, because she's too good. She's almost too good for this material.
Oh, 100%. I think she's putting Heisenberg to shame with some of her antics. Because
Well, okay, with the antics. Okay, for a minute I thought you were gonna go performance, and I'm like,
oh, definitely not performance, but in
okay.
terms of antics, and her polling power definitely is a lot bigger than what Walter ever could achieve, I will say. But I just think Wendy has become, in a way, the real star, just character-wise for me personally. It's just crazy watching her development over the past few seasons. How in the first episode she was just nothing more than just like an option, just an easy thing to get rid of for Marty and Dell, and just watching her turn into this just monster with just so much pulling power. I mean, she's moving, the senator around like a pawn on a chessboard, and just she's blackmailing the FBI and at Navarro in the very end of this, which is it's so just crazy to see how far she's come and how far the birds have come in general. But just Wendy, by far my favorite part of this first season, or first part of this last season.
Part of this last season. Yeah, and you know what's so interesting about that is that in a way, and we talk about this a lot when we talk about TV shows, as far as like usually when the writers have that first season set up, they don't really, they're usually still trying to figure out the characters out, and then usually it's about like, if not the end of the first season, by the second or third season, that's when they really got a firm grasp on their character. And there was definitely a lot of that there. Like Wendy as a character has come a long way since we were first introduced to her in that first season. But the thing that has actually shocked me a lot is going back and kind of seeing a lot of like the earlier threads that were established for her, like all the way back in that pilot episode, and seeing how that's come full circle now, like kind of, with the dissatisfaction, with the always wanting a little bit more than she may have seen that she was potential for, learning about her background in politics and everything, learning that, even though, Marty obviously had the emasculating feeling, that there may have been a reason as to why Marty wasn't the pants wearer, even though, again, he was dealing with the cartel when she was playing politics originally, And so I thought that was really interesting. Speaking of Marty, I just wanted to bring it back there. I mean, I love Jason Bateman. Jason Bateman has been the MVP. I mean, again, he's one of the creative forces behind the show. It's interesting. This is actually the first season of the entire show where he didn't direct any episodes. It's interesting enough. There were actually like a lot of really great directors in this. So you had Andrew Bernstein, who directed several episodes of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, doing the first 3. Then you had Alex Sakharov, whose credits go all the way back to The Sopranos. Like, he was a DP on The Sopranos. He directed some of the biggest episodes of Game of Thrones. He did 4 and 5. And then the final 2 actually are Robin Wright of House of Cards fame, who actually directed a few episodes for that as well. So really great talent on the directing side there. Marty, I'm going to go out on the front. I'm going to say this was Marty's weakest season. I think that this was the one where he had the least amount to do. I think that mostly, again, Marty's always been a pretty smart guy. He's usually been pretty reliable when it comes to fixing things and saving the day. And I don't necessarily know how much of that he actually accomplished this season, apart from saving Jonah when Wendy almost got him flagged by sabotaging his whatever. I don't exactly know how the moving money between accounts definitely works. But aside from doing that one thing, I mean, it felt like every situation that he set up, he constantly had to outwork his way out of. Which, again, great that it's not entirely his fault, just given what he had to deal with, with Javi and the FBI and everything that happened this season. But like, I don't know, man. It feels like Marty's slipping and losing a touch. And the number one defining reason, Jason Bateman's mumble stuttering game was like on another level this season. Like he's always had that in the last couple seasons, but like last season, like in particular, like when Navarro captured him and was holding him in that pit in Mexico, I thought that like whenever Marty needs to throw down, he throws down, and he didn't have that many moments this season. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm also the same. I love Jason Bateman. I'm a huge Arrested Development fan, and I have just carried a man crush with me for him ever.
There's
ever
always
since.
money in the banana stand.
Oh, absolutely. But I kind of agree with you when I say I just think we've seen other characters like Jonah and Wendy just come more to the forefront. And I think it's also kind of smart the way it's been written, where we kind of see how he's losing control of his family. Where we've seen Wendy just develop into this ruthless monster, blackmailing the FBI and everything. And, his own son is now taking after his steps and possibly could even surpass him one day, as, we saw Ruth say in, was it the second or third episode? But I think it is smart. And I think it's a nice way of progression where Marty is just, you can see that he's tired, after all this. And, he's close, but he can't get anyone to agree with him.
Right.
I
feel like that's the story of Marty's entire life, and we kind of see that. It's interesting. We get a lot of like interesting introspective moments, like kind of inside his head, like moments that he's hallucinating, which are things that we really haven't seen since the first episode, which is where Marty is always like right on the precipice of achieving something, and every time he is, something just comes in and just takes it away. Every time. Like, we know that's a staple of TV at this point, but I don't know why. It might just be because that's the show that we're watching at the moment, but it feels like with Marty that's particularly egregious. I don't know. That might just be me. Speaking of Ruth, let's talk about her. I would argue to say, obviously, Julia Garner's kind of big claim to fame. I still remember her seeing her in this really little indie movie called Grandma a couple years before she started in the show. Really, really impressed me there. And this is easily, again, she has gone from like a lot of other things, small indie star to superstar overnight because of the show. She's won 2 back-to-back Emmys now because of this, rightfully earned. And Roots in a little bit of an interesting spot this season where she was all out on the Birds last season after everything that happened to Ben, and she went and teamed up with Darlene, who is still sleeping with her cousin Wyatt. I still don't know what brought on that creative choice. I still blame that choice for every single like older woman hooking up with a younger guy that we've seen in like what happened. Like, I felt like it happened like with every other thing that came out this year. It was in Ted Lasso, it was in Licorice Pizza. It was in so many things. I'm like, dude, what is happening here? What is with all these older women hitting on younger guys? I was even texting my one friend. I was even making a joke. I'm like, I swear to God, if Ruth hooks up with Jonah this season, I'm out. I'm out on the show. I can't do it.
I think Jonah, obviously, it's been about 4 or 5 years since they began filming, but in the grand scheme of the show, it's been like 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, and he's
only
14. So
and
I
Ruth
doubt
is
we're
like,
going to see
Ruth
that.
is like what? Like, I don't know how old Ruth is in the context of the show. She was already a little bit old to begin with, but she's what, like 19, 20 at this point within the context of the show? I mean, in real life, Julia Garner's 26, 26 going to be 27, and Skylar Gartner, the actor who plays Jonah, is 18. So, again, it's another Licorice Pizza situation, and I'm like, no, don't you dare, Ozark. You've already got one of these fucking disgusting things going on. We don't need another one, Speaking of which, I mean, like, could it? I don't know, man. Like, I'm constantly on the wanting to hate Darlene train, but the problem is, again, it's the same problem that we have with all of these goddamn soap operas. It's the same problem that we had with freaking Gemma for all goddamn 7 seasons of Sons of Anarchy. The character is such an obvious, like, what's it called? The character is such an obvious problem, like, all the time. Except the only difference is that at the very least, the characters in Sons of Anarchy were too dumb to realize that Gemma was the source of all of their problems. This time, they know Darlene's a problem, and they know that Darlene is actively captivating it. And unlike the private investigator who just popped up, Darlene is still there, and they're still letting her walk around, almost to the point where, and spoilers ahead, I was literally almost cheering when Javier, the new resident psycho on the ground, caps her at the end of this season. And I'm like, thank fucking God, this show is finally making the right sense, because this woman, I mean, she spiked her own drug supply when she thought the people were stepping on it. She's murdered countless people for the dumbest insights. She murdered her own husband. Like, there is no limits to what this woman was unwilling to do. But the fact that this season was such a deconstruction of her power was so beyond satisfying before the final coup de grace. I mean, I don't know. Has there ever been... I mean, there's been a couple, obviously, but, obviously Rocket from ER, a couple other characters, but I don't know, man. I'm having a hard time thinking of a more hateable character on TV recently than Darlene from Sons of than Darlene. So I don't know, if you had to pick like between Darlene and Gemma from Sons of Anarchy, who would you go with?
Oh, honestly, I'd go with Darlene. She's just...
Yeah, it's fair, because Gemma at least had her moments.
Dolores Umbridge levels of just, like, pettiness and just crazy. But I do think it's very fitting, her being shot mid-sentence in her own living room, as she's done to countless characters by this point in the season.
It was so good! What did I took? I literally took... I was like, ding dong, the bitch is dead. Incredible. It was incredible.
Oh, yes. I do think her death was very fitting. It's just, so sad that we had to see...
that Wyatt unfortunately got suckered into that. But you actually brought up an interesting point about that I think was really interesting. I wanted you to go more into that, about the whole Wyatt and Darlene thing. Because for the life of me, I've still been trying to figure out, I'm just like, what made that choice came about? Like, of all the crazy, ridiculous, nonsensical things that this show has done, the decision to have Wyatt, who was a character that they literally just felt like they had nothing left to do with, and Darlene, another character that by all rights should have been out after they killed Jacob in season 2. And they were like, hey, the two characters have nothing to do. Let's just put them together. And I'm just like, oh, man. So, like, but you brought up something really interesting about that at the end. So I wanted you to go more into that further.
I will kind of disagree with you on that. I do agree that those characters were kind of almost hit a dead end at the end of season 2 where they didn't have any place to go. But I will defend the choice to bring them together and to have their relationship develop as it did, because you look at Wyatt and how he's just lost everyone. He's lost his dad. And keep in mind, he was in a position where Ruth had just told him that she killed his dad.
That's true.
And he
That's
couldn't
true.
even go back to her. Like, what? He really had no place left to go, So I think it makes sense. And plus, just we saw like the scenes in season 2 where he was talking to his dad's ghost or whatever, and it just shows how he's been missing that like key parental figure throughout his life, especially a mother. He never really had like a mother growing up. Obviously, she left when he was still very young. So, and going into the whole like psychological issues of him, he's a very just, it's just a sad character. All of the Langmores, I just feel so bad for them in a way, except for Cade,
Except for Cade. Screw Cade. Cade's the worst. That was another character. Cade was like the litmus test for like Darlene as far as showing like, okay, this is what's going to happen to Darlene. But that was just a character they were just like, okay, we got to get this guy out of here as soon as possible. I just find it hilarious that it's like, outside of Ruth, her poor two cousins, so it's like, okay, so the one is some weird mutant clone of Ben Schwartz and the other kid from Stranger Things. He looks just like them. Like, I've had so many theories about Hollywood in the last couple of years, but like with him being like, I'm like, okay, there have been Hollywood doppelgangers and clones for generations in Hollywood, but the fact that we got 3 guys that look almost identical all within the course of like 10, 15 years, I'm like, that's too much for me. And then you got the other one who's not even a character at this point, but every time we see him, I swear to God, he looks 10 years older. I'm like, I don't know. That's just the fact of like when we don't see like kids on screen for a long time, and like we're really like coming to terms with that. Again, the same thing that happened with the Robin Aaron kid in the last season of Game of Thrones, where he came back after like not being on screen for like 2 seasons. You're like, what the fuck? Who is that guy? Same thing with the Ty Simpkins kid at the end of Endgame, and you realize you're like, oh shit, it had been 6 years since he had actually been on screen in Infinity War. And so you had that, and that was just weird to begin with. And I don't know. Also, like, I don't know, like Charlotte, I don't know. I feel like another criminal underusage of Charlotte this season too. I mean, Charlotte's never been anyone's favorite character, I feel, but I don't know. She was kind of growing on me these last couple of seasons, but like kind of sticking her in the force of like, oh, everyone's kind of telling her, oh, you got to go to college, Charlotte, and oh, you got to do this, Charlotte, and it's like, she's like trying to be her own woman to help out her mom. I don't know. I feel like Charlotte's kind of in like that thankless position of, oh, this is the one character that the writers didn't really know what to do with this season, so we kind of just like had to like have everyone else kind of tell her what to do. Essentially, like, what did her actual role amount to in the end? She ended up hiding out with Jonah in a tomb and giving him like some life advice that he didn't take.
I do actually kind of have a theory about that. I think we've seen Charlotte be a little more underused this season, because I think she's going to be the one that dies in the car crash.
Really?
That is my theory about it. Because if you think about it, she's the most, I guess you could say, innocent one at this point. She's just trying to be there for her family and keep everything together. She's trying to bring Jonah back from going off and doing his work with Ruth, and she's trying to at least talk some sense into Wendy when she's going out of control. But that's my theory. I think just Charlotte being and talking her relationship with Erin, Helen's daughter, and just how Charlotte's put in this. They've asked a lot of Charlotte. I mean, even Wendy said that in the one episode. But I think Charlotte's going to be the one to die, just because she's the one who doesn't deserve to die, if that makes sense.
That actually does make a lot of sense. Again, we always know the innocents are always the one that bite the bullet. The people who deserve it, unless they're like to a Joffrey Baratheon or like a Ramsay Bolton level, the people who deserve it never actually get it. And when they do, it's always unexpected. Like, again, Del was the character that absolutely should have gotten it, just because of like his just monstrous introduction, and then for him to get killed at the end of the first season, it was literally just like a what the fuck kind of moment. This guy should have been the villain to like last like 3-4 seasons, and the fact they killed him right there. But real quick, I wanted to bring it back to that car crash, because that car crash I feel like was one of 2 moments, because again, if we're going back to the Breaking Bad comparison, we know that Breaking Bad was setting up for that final episode from the moment that the 5th season technically began, not even with the final 8 in 2013, but with the first 8 in 2012, when we had the flash forward with Walt getting getting breakfast on his birthday before he bought the machine gun, and we didn't know at the time that was setting up. So we have the opening scene in the first episode with the car, with the minivan that they're driving before they swerve and they get hit by a car. And that's kind of bookended almost by Marty having flashbacks in the finale to like him and Bruce when they were considering getting The Office way back when in the premiere, before, that infamous meeting with Del that resulted in a lot of bodies hitting the floor. So you think that's a flash forward? You don't think that's another moment inside Marty's head, the car crash?
No, I think it's definitely going to be a flash forward. I mean, you see how they're talking. They were talking about the cartel and the FBI and finally leaving the Ozarks, and it seemed like they were finally coming together again, at least Jonah was still pretty, you could see visibly distressed and kind of didn't want to be there, but I think he's still going along. Just I think they bring him back enough, and I think they mentioned 48 hours, like they're just so close to being free finally and out of it. I just think that's, I definitely think it's a flash forward, and my theory is Charlotte's going to be the one to die in that crash.
Yeah, just more timetables. I mean, the timetables here were on point. Just every single time they were on. I swear to God, the FBI was like, "You have 3 minutes." Then the cartel's like, "You have an hour and a half." Then they're like, "Oh, you have 60 minutes." I'm like, the timetable's on point here, and I'm just like, Jesus, how do the birds ever get anything done with all these timetables that are constantly thrown at them? You know?
How is their hair just not white at this point?
I mean, Laura Lenny'S is basically white, and Jason Bateman. I mean, I'm assuming that Marty uses hair dye just like Jason Bateman does in real life, because I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, the dude's 53. There's no way in hell his hair is still naturally that brown, So. Next, we get into the middle of the season, and as usual, everything goes topsy-turvy. We also had another, more Wendy doing business dealings, where Wendy brings in that part I was still a little bit strange on. So that they were trying to do business with a pharmaceutical company in order to set up more drug rehabilitation centers, which is an idea that they kind of stole from Darlene that they heard via Jonah, as a more of a front to launder money and also bring in more of the cartel's product. And I don't know, that's just a point where I know that Ozark pulls some pretty ridiculously unbelievable strings, and I know that Big Pharma is corrupt beyond belief, but I'm like, is Big Pharma really going to go into business knowing that they're going into business with the cartel? That was the part that was almost just a little bit too unbelievable for me, I don't that might have just been me, but that whole point and that whole character and everything and where that's going to go in. Again, I can tell that the private investigator character, that's more so set up for the next 7 as opposed to really being a firm plot point in this season, and just more of an excuse for Wendy to kind of more so go down her psychological rabbit hole of, and we see this happen a lot with characters, where we saw something similar happen with Saul in season 4 of Better Call Saul. I've seen it with other instances of characters in the show where they lose someone really, really close to them, usually a brother or another close family member, and then they just pretend that they're nothing's wrong and that the person is still alive and everything. And I do know that people do still go through this in real life, but I don't know. You think that's a legitimate plot point that could actually come back later? You think that's just more of an extension for Wendy's continually deteriorating psychosis?
Well, I think the plot point with the pharmaceutical company was set up. Obviously, she only did it to get that $150 million to, because she said it herself at the beginning of this season. She wanted to start controlling the elections, right, and just make her the most powerful family in the Midwest, right?
And then meanwhile, she gives a bunch of power over to this one politician whose grandson came up with a machine that lets them rig votes. That part of me, I was almost in stitches laughing. That's how hard that
is. I think it's a nice commentary on just American politics, right? I think you never really know what's going on at the top, and this show kind of gives interesting insights. Who really knows what's going on? But no, I think it also serves as great character development for Wendy. I mean, we see that she's I don't even know how to describe it, but she's reached the point where using her own dead brother that she basically, gave the okay to kill as, good PR, as she called it, for her own family name. And just, it makes you ask yourself, when's it going to end with her? What's the breaking point if she's willing to do all this? I mean, she's blackmailing the FBI. How powerful can she get?
I don't even know if gangster is the proper word to describe Wendy at this point, because I feel like, again, just the combination of so we've seen quote unquote realistic gangsters in so many different crime shows that have been done before, but you combine the pulpy and the soap opera angles, and I feel like Wendy has literally gotten to a level that almost surpasses it. It's not quite ridiculous enough to be CW, because it's still got a little bit of that ingenuity, because again, Ozark, I definitely think it's kind of reached that point that I feel like a lot of shows need to hit especially when they hit their final season, which is that level of self-awareness. And this season definitely had that. But Wendy, man, oh my God, it is next level. It is next level. I really do want, if she doesn't have the actual mustache next season, I'm gonna be mad. I'm gonna send a formal complaint to Netflix and be like, Netflix, God damn it, you had almost everything right, And I even forgave the blue color filter. The blue color filter was something that was really getting annoying. And I'm like, okay, I get it. At this show's staple signature, everything has to be blue with the most basic, it's the most most basic Avid thing that you could throw over it in order to make it look slightly cool and slightly washed out and slightly better looking than most of Netflix's other generic looking clean stuff. But like that part, but like, I'm like, man, I need the mustache twirling. I need it. She's just so evil. And like, you know that she's gotten to a point of no return when first off, she's almost like Navarro is hitting on her in that finale, which I just thought, I'm like, okay, we need more of that scene. And like, if he really saw something in her, first of all, what did he really see in her? Second of all, like, why did nothing ever happen between them? You know, I'm like, if this show was getting to that point, why did nothing ever happen with them? You know, Marty almost cheated on her. She was actively having an affair behind Marty's back, you know, and she's sleeping with like, you know, the head of that cartel. What stopped her there? And then how that kind of ended at the end when Navarro was being released and extradited back to Mexico, and he's kind of like, you disappoint me. Also, kind of a quick tidbit and a slight nitpick that I have, where Navarro tells him, oh, I don't hurt kids or threaten to hurt kids. I'm like, but your boy in season 1 actively said that he was going to kill both kids. So what's going on here? Well, what kind of inconsistency is going on here, you know?
Well, I think that's just, you know, I think that's just Del kind of flexing his muscle a little bit there.
I don't know.
It's not like really, I doubt Navarro really gave him any orders about the kids, so it's probably just common sense to kill them off. But I do want to add about Wendy. I think everything that she's been building and just her overall character progression is just summed up in that scene when Darlene has a heart attack and when you know, she snaps at her.
I would argue that's the moment. I would argue that's the moment of the season.
Like if we're talking about on
7 episodes, that right there where she collapses, says to call the ambulance, Wendy's got the phone out, then hangs it up, puts it back in the pocket. That was straight up like Tony Soprano killing Christopher from Sopranos vibes, like a moment of the freaking season where you're just the one person who's got the other person in a chokehold, knows what they do, and are just relishing in it, you know? And because we know that this has been building for quite a while, we know how much these two characters hate each other. And it's just, it's synergy. It's so satisfying to see.
If looks could kill. If looks could kill. I mean,
absolutely.
That face is still burned into my brain right now. I just can't get it out of my head. I mean, that's definitely, I think, one of the most memorable moments of the entire show for me. Just because, you know, it just felt so great for her, you know.
Oh man, so satisfying for us. I mean, I even said it. Like Darlene, after a certain point, was like my least favorite character. I was another thing. I'm like, when is this bitch gonna die? And her not dying last season. And I mean, okay, fine. The first most unbelievable thing about last season was her not dying, and then the second most unbelievable thing about last season was her hooking up with Wyatt. But again, that was the thing that I couldn't have even possibly predicted, so that wasn't even on my radar, you know. So last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into like fun, you know, next season predictions is, you know, just what's it called? Just the whole the Cosgrove thing of it all, which is where, you know, kind of again they definitely pull back with the Cosgrove character, which I think were another very weak point. They brought in Joseph Sikora from Power, and that was already like another sign to me that this was becoming like more of a pulpy show and not really like that being grounded. Because I'm like, I'm sorry, you're bringing in any character from Power, this shit's about to get ludicrous, you know. And like it ended with that guy getting his dick shot off, which was pretty cool considering the fact that he, you know, beat up a woman like half his size. But I don't know, I think they kind of sort of redeemed that character. And again, just Darlene with just a random kill count this season was on point. First with the one bodyguard for the high roller that Ruth tried to employ, then with Cosgrove Senior. Again, like have people not learned at this point? Do not mouth off to Darlene. You're gonna get a bullet to the face. Which again,
the second I saw Darlene walking over to her closet, I'm just like, oh, here we go again.
He's dead. I love how too both guys, whenever they got shot, they like flew backwards like a freaking cartoon character. I thought it was like,
not just them, you know, Del too in the first season.
Oh my god! Well,
she's got a cannon.
Well, Del was more so the fact that just we just saw his head blown off, and then we didn't, and then he kind of fell out of frame, and then when it cut back to it, we just saw like what was left of his like
his head
shot
was split in two.
It's like split in two. Like every time they do that, Joe, every time I keep thinking of like the scene from Terminator 2 when he blows the T-1000's head off, and then and like how it looks like with the pieces hanging there before it like kind of molds back together. I feel like every time they've done headshots in the future, they tried to like mimic that, but they're like, okay, we can't do it because it's not a robot. How do we make it look like as humanoid as possible? You know, and it gets more and more ridiculous every time. But I think the Cosgrove Senior kill had me laughing hard because first off, that was a character that I felt like they were setting up to like have more of an impact in the second season. That guy just got like less and less important as time gone on. I feel like bringing in Joseph Sikora as his son was already mistake number one, and the fact that they completely invalidated him, which I'm like, okay, first off, you're a gangster. You've got people that owe you money, and you're not sending out debt collectors. Okay, sign number one that you're not doing your job properly and that you probably shouldn't have the top spot. Second of all, the way that like he's kind of like mouthing off, like I don't know, there's something particularly hilarious about the way that he falls back, and then Wyatt when he later on just walks in and just sees the body on the table.
He's just like, oh man, like, oh, what do
I'm
I
like,
do?
dude, you know who you're literally in bed with, right? Like, come on, man. So I just thought that shit was fucking hilarious. A couple like unintentional comedy moments, or maybe intentionally comedy. I don't know. I think these writers just kind of roll, but they only got 7 episodes left before they do it. So these 7 are done. We've only got 7 left after this, and then Ozark is done. So Eli, before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you predictions as to what's going to happen next season. Navarro was officially out of power. They made the deal with Javier, but Javier is already flexing his power by killing Darlene and Wyatt, getting Ruth's enmity once again. This is not the first time that somebody that the Birds are kind of forced into business with has earned Ruth's enmity. So what are some of your predictions next season? What bodies besides Charlotte, who you predicted for with the car crash, are hitting the ground? Like, what's happening?
I think Wendy will die. I definitely think.
Deservedly so, I would say.
I think Wendy, of all people, kind of deserves it at this point, just for becoming the monster that she is. I actually think Wendy and Charlotte will both die, and then I think Jonah will make it out, and then he's going to set up a new life for himself, and I think it will end with Marty ending up taking that deal to become an FBI agent and work to stop people. I think this is just my personal preference. It's just as I was imagining it. I think the perfect ending would be Marty like telling his story to like someone he like catches doing something similar and just steering them away from the path.
A little Frank Abagnale Jr. action there. All right,
yes,
all right.
exactly.
Like it.
I think that would be, in my opinion, I can't see a better ending,
right.
But I think they're all gonna die. I think Ruth is gonna live. I think Ruth of all people should be the one to take out Javi because he's just
absolutely
someone's got to take him out.
Someone's got to take him out. He's literally a loose cannon. He's proven that he is literally too much to handle. What about Navarro? You think Navarro makes it or not? You think Navarro's dead as soon as he crosses the border? You think Javi takes him out now that he really doesn't need him anymore?
That's the one thing I'm kind of unsure of. I'm really not sure where Navarro's going to end up, and I kind of like that the way they've left things. I feel like he's definitely still going to play a role with what's going to come, especially with Javi and Marty. But who was the other one? There was one more character.
The private investigator?
Not him. It was
because he's obviously dead. He's obviously.
I feel like something bad's gonna happen.
Yeah. Well, because he's gonna team up with Maya, and those two are now gonna be working against them again. Now that Maya's officially against him, and kind of has struck out on her own. Maya's dead to me. Like Maya does not make it out next season alive, and that's gonna suck. But they're gonna do something. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe her kid will meet Zeke when they get a little bit older. Maybe they can, maybe they can both talk about it. It's like, hey, both of our parents were brutally murdered, and they both have got involved with the Birds. Hey, maybe we should hang out with those people.
No, I completely agree. But yeah, I think it's just gonna be a wild ending.
Oh, it's gonna be nuts. But like I said, it's gonna be Breaking Bad's final 8. It's gonna be Game of Thrones final season, and like the body's hitting the floor sense, not the hopefully story sense. Because again, this show, they know what they're doing at this point. They've got an idea. They've got an ending in mind. They are just trying to wrap this shit up as quickly as possible. So now it's just a matter of waiting for those final 7. I believe that the last thing I heard, it did confirm that we are going to get the last 7 before the end of the year, which would be pretty cool. So I know exactly what they did. They did it for Emmys. They did it because this season, they know they're going up against Succession, so they know they're going to have a brawl in their hands. This coming Emmy season, it's going to be Succession versus Ozark. And then next year, we don't know for sure if we're getting another season of Succession next year, but we know for a fact we're getting the final 7 for Ozark next year, so they'll be able to shore up their bets that way. They're going to try and get some Emmy wins, if not for drama, then maybe one for Laura Linney finally. Bateman's already got his for directing, so that's all locked up. Garner's already got hers 2 in a row, but I could definitely see them trying to, potentially get another one for her. And yeah, all that I'm going to say is Netflix, congrats for having pulled off simultaneously probably the most watched and yet most ridiculous crime show that I've seen in a while. Like this show, put it this way, right? Sons of Anarchy lost me by around season 4, but I don't think I've ever seen a show that like had a turnaround as quickly as this show. So I will give it props to that. It is definitely, I will say, it's still not my favorite or the best season. I will say that I definitely still like the first 2 seasons more. Season 3 is still my least favorite, but I'm hoping they give us a chance to like really nail these last 7 and get it in a final spot. So we're not going to do star rating. We're going to wait until the final 7 come out at the end of the year, and then once we kind of reconvene and do our like kind of like final look back on Ozark as a whole, that's probably when we'll give our final star ratings of the year. But Eli, thanks again for coming on, man. This was an absolute blast to just meet up and talk Ozark. Where can the good people find you online?
Well, I really only have an Instagram at the moment. I'm looking to maybe set up a YouTube channel in the future. I'm a huge soccer fan, as you can see by maybe some of the merch I have.
Gotta get those raging soccer takes going, man.
Yep, I'm looking to set up a podcast for that, so maybe look in the future. But if you do want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is E_Holicky, HOLICKY 45, which was my soccer number in high school.
Hey,
That's
yo.
E_Holicky 45, and yeah, that's pretty much all I got at the moment. Hopefully YouTube in the future. But
Don't worry, we'll have you more on the podcast. We'll have more people following you before you know it. Soon you'll have Twitter trolls left and right. You can follow me at they're the best at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and of course follow and as well on Letterboxd and the new app Serialize, where you can go and rank and review your favorite TV shows as well as movies. I would definitely check that out. And of course, be sure to check out everything we've got going on at the official Talking TV podcast. We're back for another podcast episode tomorrow. We're doing our top 10 favorite TV shows of 2021. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then this week we've got more new episodes of Book of Boba Fett and Talking Thrones going up as well. For myself and Eli, catch you guys next time. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. Peace out.